My name is Ethan Ward. I'm 14 years old, and I live in a town so small that if you stand in the high school football field and spin in a slow circle, you can pretty much see everything that's supposed to matter in your life. The streets all look the same. The houses all blur together. The adults' faces repeat from the grocery store to the church. And even the stories they tell sound identical after a while, just with a few names swapped out. I always thought my life would go on like that, quiet, safe, a little boring, until I met Jonas Miller. And even now, when I think back, I still can't decide if the day he transferred into my class was lucky because I survived it, or unlucky because I haven't really felt safe since. Jonas joined our class on a grey Monday morning. The teacher brought him in, sat him at the empty desk next to mine, and introduced him in the same bright tone she used with every new kid. Jonas was small, lost in a grey hoodie that was one size too big, sleeves long enough to nearly swallow his hands. When the teacher called his name, he lifted his head, but not right away. There was always this tiny half-second delay, like the words Jonas Miller needed an extra moment to travel from his ears to his brain. He wasn't ugly, just faint. The type of kid who wouldn't stand out in a class photo. If you flipped past a picture of our homeroom, your eyes would stop on the kids laughing too loud or posing in the front. Jonas would be the smudge in the corner, but there was something about him that caught my attention anyway. The way he watched people. During lessons, when the teacher asked questions and everyone else ducked their heads or shot hands in the air, Jonas just watched. Not the board, not the teacher people. It looked like he was taking notes, not on the subject, but on the little things. How they held their pens, how they breathed when they were nervous, how they smiled, how they glanced at each other. Whenever someone talked to him, he'd answer politely enough, but his eyes would sometimes drift just over their shoulder as if he was also listening to someone standing behind them that nobody else could see. He didn't scare me. If anything, I found him strangely comfortable to be around. Jonas never talked over you, never tried to impress anyone, never forced the mood or made you feel stupid. He was like this quiet, empty space in the middle of all the shouting and gossip and nonsense of school. Maybe that's why we became friends so fast. We shot hoops together on the back court, copied each other's homework sometimes, shared a table in American Lit. I talked more than he did. He listened more than he talked. Sometimes I'd finish a long story, wait for him to laugh or react, and he'd sit there looking spaced out. I'd think he hadn't heard a word. Then, the next day, he'd casually bring up some tiny detail I'd already forgotten I'd said. "I remember," he'd say, and then he'd smile, a little too slowly. Sometimes he was strange in other ways. We'd be walking down the hallway and he would suddenly stop, turning his head sharply to stare at a bare patch of wall, his face tightening like someone was yelling at him just out of earshot. A second later, he'd go back to normal. No explanation. But all of that still fit inside what you might brush off as quirks, the kind of thing you'd tell yourself is just part of his personality. It stayed that way right up until that Friday afternoon. School was over, the parking lot was thinning out, and the air had that late autumn bite to it cold enough that my breath came out in pale clouds and I zipped my jacket all the way up. Jonas and I wheeled our bikes out together. He walked alongside me, quiet as usual, pushing his bike with one hand, the other tucked in his hoodie pocket. I was about to say bye and veer off toward my street when he spoke, his voice a little rough. "Ethan, are you busy tonight?" "Me?" I shrugged. Probably not. Why? He kept his eyes on his handlebars, thinking about something, like he was double-checking with someone in his head. Then he looked at me and said, "Do you want to come over to my place?" I was surprised. Jonas had never invited anyone over. Everything I knew about his home life was just rumour, that he lived all the way on the edge of town, near the tree line where the houses started to vanish. "Tonight?" I asked. He nodded. "I need someone there," he said. "Just for tonight." He said it like a favour, but not exactly. Not like borrowing homework or asking for help with chores. More like asking me to stand somewhere and witness something that had already been decided. I hesitated, but not for long. I was 14, bored, and curious. "Yeah, sure," I said. "After dinner?" He didn't smile. He just let out a very quiet breath, like he'd been holding it for too long. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a piece of paper folded into quarters, edges crisp, fold lines perfect. He handed it to me without meeting my eyes. "Keep this," he said. "Read it before you come. Don't throw it away, and don't laugh." "What is it?" "Some rules," he said. "For my house." He didn't wait for questions. He just pushed off, tires crunching over gravel, and pedaled away down a different street, his small figure swallowed up by rows of trees. I stared at the folded paper in my hand for a moment, wind tugging at my sleeves, filling the air with the smell of smoke and fallen leaves. Later that evening, after dinner, in the yellow light of my desk lamp, I finally unfolded it. It was written in Jonas's handwriting, small, neat, slightly slanted, each line evenly spaced, like he'd measured it out with a ruler. Rules for the Miller house. To 1. Do not look into any mirrors in the house after 6 p.m. 2. If you see anyone in the house standing with their back turned for too long, do not call out to them. Do not touch them, and do not go closer. 3. When walking through the long hallway on the ground floor, do not stop even if someone calls your name. 4. Any food that is already set on the table before you arrive, do not touch it. 5. If my parents or anyone else in the house asks you what time it is, answer, "I'm not wearing a watch." 6. Do not open the front door or the back door by yourself. Only leave when someone from the house opens a door for you. 7. After 11 p.m., if you hear footsteps upstairs above you, do not look up. 8. When the sun begins to rise, follow me out of the house. Do not walk ahead. Do not lag behind. 9. You are allowed to forget at most 1 rule. If you forget 2 or more, don't bother trying to run. I read it twice, from top to bottom. Every rule felt like a threat, disguised as a warning. At first, I laughed. It sounded like one of those creepy sleepover challenges you read online. Go to a weird friend's house, follow a list of rules, see if a ghost shows up. But when I reached the last line, if you forget 2 or more, don't bother trying to run, something cold stirred at the base of my spine. I leaned back in my chair, the paper still in my hand, and asked myself, what kind of kid sat down and wrote something like this? And if it wasn't a joke, what kind of house needed rules like these? I glanced at my clock. 5:50 p.m. The Millers lived out past the hardware store, and then another 10 minutes of pedaling into the trees. 20 minutes, give or take. If I left now, I'd arrive just after 6. Right when rule number 1 started to matter, I folded the paper again, tucked it into my back pocket, grabbed my jacket, and headed out. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice suggested I might just be walking into a story I'd tell my friends for years. You won't believe how weird this family is. Another voice, quieter and harder to hear, told me to stay home. I listened to the first one. The further I rode, the thinner the streetlights became. The glow behind me, our neighborhood, the grocery store, the gas station shrank. Ahead, the road turned into a dark ribbon, lit only in patches. Trees leaned in on both sides, their branches knitting together overhead in tangled black shapes. The Miller house sat after a bend, just before the forest thickened completely. It was a 2-story wooden house, paint faded to ash grey, roof pitched steep, chimney crooked. The front yard was a rectangle of white gravel. No lawn, no toys, no cars, no garden. The windows were all hidden behind heavy curtains. The only sign the place was awake was the light leaking through the fabric. I left my bike leaning against a low fence and walked up to the porch. I lifted my hand to knock. The door opened before I touched it. Jonas stood there, framed in the light from inside. He looked smaller somehow, standing in his own doorway. His eyes were darker than they'd been at school, like someone had turned down the brightness behind them. "Come in," he said quietly. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a deep, sealed sound, like a lid being pressed onto a jar. The first thing I noticed was the smell, or rather, the lack of any normal house smell. No traces of dinner, no dust, no warm scent of detergent or wood polish. Just a thin, dry, cold smell, like paper that had been kept in a drawer for too long. The living room was bigger than I expected. Ceiling low, walls close, old wooden floorboards polished to a dull shine. The walls were hung with framed family photos. One of them drew my attention immediately. A picture of Jonas as a little boy standing between his parents. His parents' faces were smiling, but something was off. Their eyes, the tilt of their heads. When I let my gaze drift from frame to frame, I realized what it was. In every photo, no matter what pose they were in, Jonas's parents were looking at the camera in exactly the same way. Same angle of their heads, same shape of the mouth, same crinkle at the corner of the eye. Their expressions weren't just similar, they were identical, as if someone had copied and pasted the same face over and over. The dining room was open to the left, and that was where I saw the table. It was covered with plates of food, meat, bread, soup, salad, glasses of water, a bowl of something steaming. All of it already laid out. Rule number 4 tapped at my memory. My hand twitched toward a glass and I forced it away. Jonas's parents were standing by the table. A third man, a taller, broader figure, stood with his back to us at the end of the long hallway that cut through the house. None of them spoke when I stepped in. They simply watched me. I swallowed and forced a smile. "I'm Ethan," I said. "I'm in Jonas's class." They didn't answer right away. There was a pause so long I began to wonder if they'd heard me. Then, perfectly synchronized, all 3 of them nodded once. A tiny controlled nod, like someone had pressed play on them. Jonas brushed my sleeve with his fingers. "Let's go up to my room," he said under his breath. "Let them do their own thing." He tugged me gently toward the stairs. The staircase was wooden and narrow. Mirrors hung on either side, framed in dark wood. I fixed my eyes on the back of Jonas's hoodie, refusing to let my gaze slide sideways. Rule number 1 was flickering at the front of my mind. After 6, no mirrors, Jonas's room looked like it belonged to a completely different house. His bed was pushed against the wall, blankets slightly messy, a clutter of notebooks and pencils on the desk, a couple of old cartoon posters crooked on the wall. Out the window, I could see the line of black trees that marked the start of the woods. "It's fine up here," Jonas said, as if he'd just read my mind. "As long as you remember not to push too hard against the rules." "Why do you even have those rules?" I asked. "Your family into some kind of weird tradition thing?" Jonas stared at his hands for a moment, then said, "They're not like other people, but they try. The rules make everything easier. For everyone. Easier. That wasn't the word I would have used for any of this. I didn't ask more. At that point, I still needed the illusion that this was some elaborate, awkward family ritual and not something that could actually hurt me. We hung out for a while, talked about school, flipped through a comic book. Inside Jonas's room, the house's strangeness dulled. The ceiling was low, the lamp warm, the familiar objects reassuring. If I tried hard enough, I could pretend we were at my place, not his. Around 7, I got thirsty. Jonas was scribbling in a notebook, head bent low, when I stood up. "I'm gonna grab some water," I said, "from the kitchen. Okay?" He jerked his head up like I'd poked him. "You're going down?" he asked. "Yeah. I'll be quick." He hesitated. For a second, I thought he'd say no. Instead, he nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Just remember what I wrote." I laughed, even though the sound came out too thin. "I won't break your precious rules." I realized, the second those words left my mouth, how stupid they were. The upstairs hallway was narrower in the dark, the single yellow bulb barely pushing back the shadows gathering along the floor and ceiling. Each step I took made the floorboards whisper. Right at the top of the stairs, on the landing, was a large mirror fixed to the wall. Its frame was carved and worn, and its surface wasn't completely clear, but it reflected enough. I stared at the steps, at my own shoes. Rule number 1, no mirrors after 6. But human brains are idiots, especially when they know they shouldn't do something. Something in the reflection caught my eye, a tiny movement behind my own shape. Before I could stop myself, my gaze flickered up. In the mirror, behind me, in the stretch of hallway that I knew was empty, stood a tall, thin figure. Too tall. Its back was to me, shoulders hunched inward, spine bowed into an unnatural curve. The head tilted slightly to one side, like it was listening to something on the floor. I spun around. The hallway was bare, just the peeling paint and the closed doors. My chest tightened. I turned back again, because of course I did. Now the figure in the mirror was closer, still turned away, still motionless, but no longer at the far end. It had moved halfway down the hall without making a sound. A cold line of dread opened from the base of my neck all the way down my back. I stumbled forward, almost tripping on the first step in my hurry to get away from the mirror. As my foot hit the third stair, a voice whispered up from the hallway behind me. "Ethan." It sounded like Jonas, almost. But the edges of his voice were stretched wrong, the syllables pulled like warm taffy, thin and trembling. Rule number 3, lit up in my head. in huge red letters. Do not stop in the hallway, even if someone calls your name. I'd already broken rule 1. I wasn't going to break another. I didn't turn. I didn't answer. I just ran all the way down the stairs, gripping the railing so hard my fingers hurt. The kitchen at the back of the house was empty. The fluorescent light flicked on when I hit the switch, painting everything in flat white. I poured myself water from the sink, hands shaking so much the glass chattered on the counter. I had just lifted it to my mouth when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside. Not hurried, not lurking. Just slow, dragging steps. Heel, then toe, then a soft scrape, like the person or whatever it was wasn't bothering to lift their feet properly. I flicked the light off instinctively. The kitchen fell into a gloom lit only by the dim spill from the living room and the microwave's green clock. I crouched behind the counter, putting the cabinets and island between me and the doorway. My breath sounded huge in my ears. The kitchen door eased open. No creak, just the faint sound of wood shifting. Feet entered first, bare feet. The toes were wrong bent at odd angles, like someone had jammed them into shoes that were too small for years and then yanked them out again. The legs were covered in pajama pants, but the way the joints moved underneath, too stiff in some places, too loose in others, made my stomach twist. The person was tall, much taller than Jonas's father had seemed from a distance. The spine bent so sharply that the upper back bulged, head hanging forward. The entire figure was turned away from me, showing only its back. It stopped in the middle of the kitchen. Silent, I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed myself against the cabinet, every muscle screaming at me not to move. Rule 2. If you see someone standing with their back turned for too long, don't go near them. I didn't have to worry about that. I was already too close. The figure's head twitched. Not like a normal quick turn. It rotated slowly, in a wide arc, further than a human neck should bend, as if it were testing how far the bones could go. I could feel it listening. I tried to slow my breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, making my chest expand as little as possible. The seconds stretched. My thighs burned, my palms were slick on the cabinet wood. Finally, the figure began to move, not by turning around and walking out, but by dropping forward, letting its hands reach the floor and pulling itself along. It crawled out of the kitchen, long arms dragging the rest of its body, legs limp, joints protesting with a faint series of cracks. It was like watching a giant marionette dragged by its strings across the floor. When the last traces of its shadow vanished from the doorway, I counted to 50 under my breath before I dared to uncurl my fingers from the cabinet and stand. I had to get back upstairs. Jonas had to know what was going on. He had to have some idea how far this could go. The staircase seemed twice as long the second time. Every single step creaked, no matter how carefully I tried to move. Halfway up, the sound started. Footsteps above me. Not like the crawling thing I'd seen. These were heavy, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. Each one made the boards overhead vibrate. I stopped without choosing to stop. Rule 7. After 11 p.m., if you hear footsteps above you, do not look up. My eyes slid to the clock hanging on the wall at the bottom of the stairs. The hands were pressed together at 11, the minute hand just past it. The footsteps came closer to the top of the stairs. I saw a shadow spill down the wall in front of me. distorted by the angle and the low light. A voice rasped down from above. It sounded like a tape played backward, then forward again, trying to imitate human speech. Then, come up. The words scraped at my nerves. The voice repeated my name as if it was testing how it fit in a mouth that wasn't designed for words. I dropped my gaze, staring at my sneakers. I could feel pressure at the nape of my neck, like someone was leaning over the banister, their face inches from the top of my head, breathing on me. Do not look up, do not look up. The thing above me inhaled, a long, ragged breath, as if filling lungs that had no proper shape. Then the footsteps moved away, slowly, deliberately, towards one of the rooms down the hall. As soon as the sound faded enough that I could convince myself it was gone, I bolted up the rest of the stairs. I didn't care if my own footsteps echoed through the whole house. Jonas's door opened before I could knock. He grabbed my sleeve and yanked me inside, shutting and locking the door in one motion. "How many rules have you broken?" he asked, breathing fast. "2, I said, my voice cracking. I looked in the mirror and I stopped when something called my name in the hall. "Aiton's?" Jonas's face twisted like he'd been punched. "2, he repeated. "You shouldn't have gone down alone." He stopped halfway through the sentence, eyes unfocused, lips tightening like he was hearing something I couldn't. "I shouldn't have invited you," he finished. "Jonas, what is going on?" I demanded, fear and anger tangled together. "Who are those people? What are they?" "They're my family," he said quietly, "in a way. And those rules are the only thing that keeps everything in bounds. If you follow them, they don't pay too much attention." "And if you don't?" I asked, even though I already had an idea. "If you don't," he said, eyes very dark, "then you're something new." I didn't ask what new meant. Time stretched again. We sat on the edge of his bed, backs to the wall, listening. The house was not quiet. In the distance, downstairs, chairs scraped, footsteps circled, doors opened and closed without pattern. Sometimes a laugh floated up, too sharp or too hollow to belong to a normal human throat. Every time a sound came closer, Jonas flinched. "At least 2 more hours, he murmured at one point, glancing at his clock. "If you don't break anything else." 2 hours, I whispered. "We can't just sit here for 2 hours. Would you rather go back down there?" he asked. I didn't answer. Around 2 in the morning, something stopped in front of Jonas's door. We heard the boards outside shift as weight settled on them. Then came the soft, deliberate tapping of fingernails on wood, following the outline of the frame. Jonas pressed a finger to his lips. His eyes never left the handle. "This is my father," he mouthed. "He's checking the doors." "For what?" I barely shaped the words. "To see if anyone forgot to lock them," Jonas whispered back. "And to listen." We held our breath. The tapping slid down to the lock, then stopped. After a moment, the weight on the floorboards pulling at the hinges eased, and the footsteps moved on. At around 3, a woman's voice started singing downstairs. The tune was almost familiar, a lullaby I'd heard somewhere long ago, but the words weren't right. They were too long, vowels stretched until they tangled, consonants blurring together. It sounded like another language wearing English like a badly fitted coat. The singing moved slowly through the house, from the kitchen to the living room to the base of the stairs. It drifted up, softer, until it hung outside Jonas's room like a layer of mist. I pressed my knees to my chest, every muscle tight. "Ethan, come down for breakfast," the woman's voice said suddenly, as calm and smooth as if it were Sunday morning. Every childhood instinct screamed at me to respond, to say yes, ma'am, to be polite, to open the door like any well-raised kid would. Rules 4 and 5 crashed into each other in my head. I kept my mouth shut. A shadow pooled under the gap of the door, stretching towards us. It grew longer, then shorter, like someone was bending close, pressing their face to the floor, staring through that slit of light. "She likes polite people," Jonas whispered. So quietly, I only knew he'd spoken because his lips moved. "She likes them even more when they answer wrong." 8-2. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste blood. After a while, the shadow retreated. Footsteps went back down. The song continued somewhere else, a little farther away. "How much longer?" I asked. Voice hoarse. 2 hours, Jonas said. "Maybe less. Depends on them." I almost laughed. "Depends on them" wasn't comforting, but at least it was honest. Around 5, the power went out. There was a small, sharp click, and then the lamp on Jonas's desk died. The ceiling light went with it. The only illumination came from the clouded grey outside, smeared across the window. "This normal?" I asked, fighting the urge to shout. "They like the dark better," Jonas said. "This is the hardest part." He stood up. "We can't stay here," he added. "If we stay, they'll want to see what we're doing." "Go where?" I asked. "What room in this house is safer than this?" "No room is safe," Jonas said, and somehow hearing him say that made me feel calmer because it fit what I'd already seen. "But if we move, it's harder to pin us down." He cracked the door open, listened for a full minute, then motioned for me to follow. The hallway was almost black, the weak pre-dawn light barely touching the far end. We headed for the bathroom at the end of the hall. Jonas claimed the walls there were thicker, the sound didn't carry as well, and the lock was sturdier. We slipped inside and turned the lock, not daring to turn on the light. The room smelled like damp tiles and leftover soap. Through the tiny frosted window, the sky was a heavy, colourless slate. I slid down with my back to the bathtub, heart pounding against my ribs. The tapping started again, this time not on Jonas's door, on the stairs. We heard it through the floor, tap, 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 each step up from the first floor all the way to the second. Then the weight moved along the hallway toward us. The doorknob jiggled, tiny, experimental rattles. The lock held. Someone or something chuckled softly on the other side. The laugh was high-pitched, nearly childish, but the way it stretched at the end, like a note played too long on a broken violin string, made my skin crawl. Thin scratching followed, nails dragging down the wood from top to bottom. No rush, just a patient, humming rhythm, like it had all the time in the world. Then, suddenly, silence. A burst of running footsteps retreated down the hall, down the stairs, away. "Who was that?" I whispered. "Not who," Jonas said. "One of them. They live..." "Where?" My voice shook. "In your rooms? Outside?" "In the walls," Jonas said softly. "Between the walls and the cabinets, under beds, behind mirrors, wherever it's dark enough. I decided I wasn't going to look into any dark corners for a very long time after that. We didn't stay in the bathroom long. Jonas didn't want to give anything time to track our breathing. He led me instead to a storage room on the other side of the floor, a boxy windowless space full of cardboard boxes, broken lamps, a stack of old chairs, and several mirrors shrouded in sheets. We climbed into a hollow between two stacks of boxes and pulled a dusty blanket down over the front, turning our hiding place into a cramped little cave that smelled faintly of mould and metal. Time lost all meaning. Sometimes I heard whispering clearly right next to my ear, but when I opened my eyes, there was no one. Sometimes the ceiling thumped as if something heavy crawled over it. Dust rained down in little clouds, coating my hair and tongue. Once, a small, pale hand slid under the bottom of the wardrobe across from us. The fingers were too long, joints bending backwards as they searched along the floor. They stopped inches from our hiding spot, tapping lightly at the boards, then withdrew as smoothly as they'd appeared. I'm still amazed I didn't scream. Finally, the quality of the light changed. It was subtle at first. The darkness behind the blanket turned from solid black to thin grey. Air pushed faintly against the fabric, like the house was breathing out. Jonas lifted the edge of the blanket and peeked out. The hallway outside was still shadowed, but a sliver of pale morning had slipped past the edges of the curtains downstairs. "Okay," he whispered, "we have to go. Now. If we wait, they won't want to let you go." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he said quickly, as if cutting off his own thoughts. "Just remember Rule 8. You follow me, not beside me, not behind." I nodded, even though my legs felt like they might collapse as soon as I stood up. We stepped back into the hallway. Silence. No laughter, no tapping. The house's earlier noise had folded into a thick, eerie stillness. Downstairs, the living room was grey and washed out. The dining table was bare now, only faint rings and crumbs proving that food had been there at some point. The kitchen looked ordinary. Chairs in place, counter clean, ordinary. If I didn't remember the way things had moved through those rooms in the dark. The family was waiting at the front door, all three of them. Jonas's mother in her neat dress, his father in his cardigan, and the tall, twisted man whose back I'd seen first in the mirror. They were lined up in front of the door, shoulders almost touching. All of them had their backs turned. They didn't move when we approached. They didn't speak. They didn't breathe, at least, not in any way I could see or hear. Jonas walked toward them at a measured pace. I stayed exactly one step behind, my hands clenched into fists so tight my nails dug crescents into my palms. When we were close enough to smell the faint scent of starch and cold air clinging to their clothes, the tallest man reached up with one long arm and closed his hand around the doorknob. His fingers were white, the knuckles too smooth, the nails too perfect. There were no visible fingerprints, no wrinkles, nothing to mark them as having ever belonged to a real, living person. He turned the knob. The door opened onto the front yard. The gravel, the skinny strip of road, a breeze slid in, cold and clean, carrying with it the distant sound of birds waking up. "Go," Jonas said quietly. "Don't look back." We stepped out onto the porch. As my shoes crunched into the gravel, something unwound inside my chest. The pressure I hadn't realized was coiling around my ribs loosened. The air outside was freezing, but compared to the inside of that house, It felt like stepping into a warm bath. When I reached my bike, I made the mistake of turning around. Just once. I didn't look at their faces. I didn't want to know what their eyes were doing, or whether their mouths were still stuck in the same smile from the photographs. I looked at the doorway as a whole. All three shapes still stood there, backs facing outward, forming a dark frame against the dim interior. Jonas was a few steps inside, half shadowed. He held something in his hand. "Here," he said, walking forward enough to pass it to me. It was another folded piece of paper. "Read it when you get home," he said. "And, Ethan?" "Yeah?" "If anything strange happens at your house," he said, blinking slowly, "don't pretend you don't know why." My throat felt dry. I didn't answer. I just nodded, climbed on my bike, and pedaled. Back in my room, door locked, curtains drawn, the world outside my window finally looking like the normal suburb I'd grown up in, I remembered the paper. My fingers fumbled in my jacket pocket until they felt the familiar shape. Same handwriting, same perfectly neat lines. It was a copy of the rules I'd been given before, every single one of them. Only this time, there was an extra line at the bottom, written in red ink. 10. If you break 2 rules, they will stop when the sun rises. If you break 3, they will come for you on another night in the place you call home. I read that sentence over and over. Mirror 1. Stopping in the hallway 2. I hadn't answered his mother. I hadn't looked up at the footsteps. I hadn't opened any door. 2 rules. Right on the edge, since that night, I haven't looked into a mirror at home after the sun goes down. Sometimes, walking through the hallway outside my bedroom, I feel, more than see, someone standing with their back turned at the far end, waiting to see whether I stop or keep moving. Every so often, on cloudy nights, I hear faint footsteps in the ceiling above my bed, even though our house only has 1 floor. And every time I freeze and lie absolutely still, staring into the dark, I repeat Jonas Miller's rules in my head like a prayer. The rules of the Miller house. The only thing, as far as I know, that still keeps me on this side of the door.